three main categories of pollution. Water pollution today. We're going to do air pollution. And then we're going to do solid waste. And like I said, the good news about this unit is a lot of it you're like going to go, oh, eutrophication. We've talked about that all year long. I know it. Or, hey, indicator species. We've talked about that before. I know it. So, good news, we're ending the year on something that shouldn't be too difficult. All right, what is a pollutant and what is pollution? Pollutants are released by human activity. So something that we are doing by being on this planet is causing harm to the environment or other animals. That's what a pollutant is. As the population increases, therefore, so does pollution. So as we get more people, we're going to pollute the planet more. Just inherently by there being more of us. Not necessarily because like, oh, I'm going to birth little polluting babies. My kids might be a little more ecologically friendly, but they're just there, so they're going to create pollution. It comes in the form of matter, gas, liquid, or solid, organic and inorganic. What's the difference between organic and inorganic? Organic contains carbon. Inorganic does not. It could be in the form of energy. So heat pollution, if you've ever surfed at San Onofre, that's thermal pollution. Where we're using the water of the ocean to cool the nuclear reactor, and then we're putting hot water back out in the ocean. That's not great for the animals that live in that ocean. They're used to a current temperature of our cold Southern California oceans, and we're upping the temperature. They're not going to want to live there. It could be noise. If I open my doors, we have noise pollution. We're right by the freeway, so you have to hear that. That is a form of pollution. Or light. When we talk about light pollution, a lot of times we talk about the famous test questions about sea turtles that are coming onto the beaches to lay their eggs or to mate, and they won't come onto the beaches if there's a lot of light at night. Well, all of the resort hotels that are on the beaches put out light pollution. And so some places during turtle birthing times, they will actually shutter all of the lights on the ocean side of the resort so that we don't have that light pollution. Primary pollutants are active in the form that they're emitted. So they are a pollutant immediately when they come out of the tailpipe of your car, immediately when they come out of the pipe of the sewer system. A secondary pollutant has to mix with either air or atmosphere or with water to become a pollutant. So when it comes out, it's pretty innocuous, it's harmless, but then when it mixes with water or it mixes with air, then it becomes a problem. We can define our pollutants in two forms, point source and non-point source, and we've seen this before as well. Point source is the easiest pollutant to take care of because you know exactly where it came from. You can go, oh, look, that car is putting out huge swaths of smoke. That's the source of the pollutant. And because I know it's that car, I can fix that car and get rid of the pollution. Non-point source is a little harder. Non-point source, I can't figure out who's emitting the pollution. It could be any number of people. Well, if I can't figure it out who's doing it, it's hard to stop it. When we talk about non-point source, we usually have sweeping regulations. We have sweeping laws that affect everyone, or taxes that affect everyone. So like the gas tax that we've killed ad nauseum in this class. That affects everyone, no matter how clean a vehicle you're driving. You're still going to be penalized because of bad air emissions. Two types of pollution here. We've got acute and chronic. Acute, the pollution goes out and we can immediately clean it up, no harm, no foul. Right? So as soon as we fix the problem, it's gone. Oil spills tend to fall more into the acute problem because I can go in and clean up all the oil and then the pollution's done with. Chronic is a little bit different. Chronics are small amounts of pollution released over a long period of time. Usually they're non-point source, very hard to clean up. And so it becomes a chronic, every day, every year problem. Air pollution falls under chronic. We can measure and monitor pollution in two ways, direct and indirect. Direct, I see the tanker run aground, I see the oil coming out, I can measure the amount of oil. It's raining out. I can go out and collect some of the rainwater and dip a pH monitor in and see if there's acid rain. That's a direct measurement. Indirect measurement's a little bit harder. Indirect is how I'm really going to look at this chronic pollution. We are going to, fingers crossed, weather holding, go out and set up an indirect pollution monitoring at the creek right behind Starbucks. We're going to do what's called Trent Biotic Index. So we're going to put out traps and capture aquatic insects. Depending on what insects we find, we can kind of figure out the health of the river. Some insects like really polluted water, some like really clean water, and so depending on what's there, we have an indirect measurement of how polluted that stream is. Frogs are the ultimate index species. Frogs, because they have to breathe through their skin, they're the first ones to suffer when there's a lot of pollution. So frogs are the first ones to die. If we start seeing our amphibians die off, we know there's a problem in the environment. Frogs are also the first ones to mutate, to end up with extra legs or legs where they don't belong. Again, a signal that there's a problem in the environment. It's an indirect measurement. We can manage our pollution. If it is truly human activity doing the polluting, we can change human activity. So we can do campaigns like we did for the AP with We, where we try and get people to unplug or to turn off lights. We can do education. This class is one huge environmental education, stop polluting the world type class, right? A lot of you probably have a little bit different viewpoint now than you did in September on how to do things in the environment. We can have community groups, legislation, laws, economic incentives. Unfortunately, it's getting harder to recycle our cans because China's not taking it anymore. But every time you buy something in a can or a bottle, they charge you 5 cents on top. How do you get that back? You take it to recycling, you get your 5 cents back. That's an economic incentive to do better by the environment. If we know the release of the pollutant in the environment, we can control that release. We can go in and find the company that's doing it. We can clean it up. And then we can restore the ecosystem and remove the pollutant, restock. If fish all died because of some pollutant, we can restock that lake. This is what we're mainly going to talk about today, though, which is water pollution. Start with a little video. All right, do we have combined sewer systems in SoCal? No. Do we have times after heavy rains, though, when we have sewage spills on our beaches? 100%. Some of that is just old infrastructure. So our pipes are old. Just like our fresh water pipes are starting to burst because they're old, same thing with our sewage pipes. So we still occasionally have that problem. Do we have the same problem with storm drains and runoff after storms? Like, who's going to willingly go surfing today? Why shouldn't you? Because it's raining and all of the stuff that was on your streets and on your lawns is now out in our beaches. That's all of the animal waste. All of the homeless encampments that are along the river, that's human waste as well. So maybe going surfing right after the rain, not the best idea because we don't have combined. We don't have our waste, our storm drain going into our sewer system, which is good because then we don't get overwhelmed. But on the other hand, we don't have any sanitation of what's coming out of our storm drains. The types of water pollution that we see, anthropogenic, that's a term that you should know by now. It's anything caused by humans. We do have some natural. We have algal blooms that happen naturally. If we have an upwelling of nutrient-rich water off our coast, we're going to have an algal bloom. Those do happen occasionally, but a lot of times when we do see huge algal blooms, it's due to eutrophication because of human. We talked point source, non-point source, organic, non-organic, direct, non-direct. All of these are terms that you need to know. Our main pollutants here, sewage is a problem. It's human waste. It can cause eutrophication. So even if we say not the bacterial problem, not the thought that we might get E. coli because we're swimming in human waste, it is eutrophication. So all of the nutrients that are in your personal human manure will lead to eutrophication. It also smells. Animal waste. Biological detergents like soap. Soaps have a lot of phosphate or phosphorus in it, which then leads to algal blooms. We can talk about food processing waste. Pesticides from agriculture. So anything that you sprayed on your lawn to get rid of bugs, now today is in our storm drains and in our oceans. Pathogens, chemistry from industry. We don't see this that much anymore because it's heavily regulated and fined, but occasionally a company is going to see it easier to dump stuff down the drain than to pay for hazardous waste. Every year our school pays probably $10,000 to get rid of all of the hazardous waste that comes out of marine biology and anatomy. So all of those buckets of specimens, like the preserved pigs and the preserved earthworms, all of that is in formalin. Formalin is a hazardous waste. So it's the chemical that preserves it. We can't dump that down the drain. We have to have someone from a hazardous waste company come and pick that up to dispose of it properly. And then invasive species are a huge kind of pollutant. And you don't think an animal is a pollutant, but it's something that's coming into the environment and causing harm. So an invasive species is also a pollutant. I'm not going to read this all to you, but these are our main inorganic pollutants. Nitrates, phosphates, and phosphorus are all nutrients that are going to lead to eutrophication. We've seen this slide before. I pulled it off one of your earlier lectures. Biomagnification is the process where the chemical becomes more and more concentrated as you go up the food chain. So it's in the shrimp absorb it, doesn't kill the shrimp. And then that shrimp is eaten by a small fish, and the fish absorbs it, doesn't kill the fish. And that fish is eaten by a bigger fish, and the fish absorbs it, but because that bigger fish is eating so much, he's getting more of that poison, and finally by the time you get to your top predators, they can no longer live with that pollutant in their body, and it starts killing off the animals. Or it has detrimental effects like weakening the shell of an egg. Bioaccumulation, the animal takes in small amounts of the chemical without ingesting it or excreting it, and it builds up. So biomagnification, bioaccumulation, kind of the same principle. DDT we've talked about before. It is your classic example of biomagnification. We're going to do a lab with it again tomorrow. This is what killed your condors. And I'm not going to show you the slides again because you've seen them, but they're here for when you review for your test. When we talk about our types of pollution in our water, we have suspended solids. This is anything that's going to go in the water and not sink. So it kind of creates this haze in the water. That haze in the water prevents photosynthesis because it prevents light from penetrating into the water. That haze in the water, if you have anything that filter feeds, like coral, like mussels, it gums up their ability to filter feed. So it kind of gets on their gills, it gets on the little feathers that they use to feed out of the water. Solid domestic waste, household garbage, plastic bags in California. You now have to buy them because sea turtles were eating them, thinking they were jellyfish. Horrible. Plastic rings. It can cause suffocation and starvation. And then debris. Debris is like large scale stuff. It's coming off of shipwrecks. And the big source of debris a few years ago was the tsunami in Japan. When that tsunami happened, right, big waves of water went onshore in Japan and then retreated back out to the ocean and taking all of the stuff that was onshore back into the ocean. We started to see that stuff about a year later popping up in Canada and in Portland and on the west coast of California as the currents brought it around. So that debris could either be a little beneficial. Sometimes we see in the gyres that the debris becomes kind of a floating reef for organisms. They all kind of start hanging out there. But as all of that plastic stuff starts to kind of degrade in the sunlight and the heat, that's going to release chemicals and leach chemicals into the water. That's the same reason like why you shouldn't leave your plastic bottles in your car over summer, because the plastic will actually leach into the water as it heats. Same thing's happening in our oceans. Not good for you, not good for our marine animals. Okay, some organisms are more tolerant to pollution than others. An indicator species is a species whose presence either indicates pollution or healthy river. We do this by the Trent Biotic Index, and if you look here, if we go out to the stream by Starbucks and we see a lot of mayfly nymphs, they're really kind of ugly. These things turn into dragonflies. If we see a bunch of them in the river, we know that river is polluted. If, on the other hand, if we see a bunch of these, the river is not polluted. These are good. Dragonflies, good. If we see a lot of worms, then the water is more polluted, because worms like polluted water. Mayflies like clean water. We're going to do this by going out and setting leaf traps, and then a week later we collect in the leaf traps and bring them back to campus and go through and find what insects we see.
What we're doing today is having our annual macroinvertebrate event, where we actually go out in the streams and look for macroinvertebrates, and that helps us check on stream health. What we're trying to do is make sure that the farms in the area put as little pollution from the farm into the streams, because that eventually goes from the streams down to larger creeks, down to the Schuylkill River, and makes its way down to Philadelphia. So what you see the biologists doing when they're picking up the different macroinvertebrates out of the stream, they're looking at the quantity and the type of macroinvertebrates that are there in the stream.
Yeah, aquatic insects are rated on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being the most pollution sensitive and 10 being the most tolerant. So according to what type of insects you find,
Those are the
you
mayfly.
can tell whether a stream is good water quality, medium, bad, whatever.
If we started out cleaning all the streams or helping to improve the streams from Schuylkill County all the way down to Philadelphia, then the people who are actually getting water from Philadelphia will have cleaner water right from the get-go.
So like I said, barring rain, we'll go out and do that this weekend. Eutrophication we have covered ad nauseum. First step of eutrophication, what is it? What's the first thing that happens if we're going to have a lake or a river? We're going to have runoff high in nutrients. What's the second thing that happens? Not yet. Algae grows. So we have a massive bloom of algae because all of that nutrients, algae are basically aquatic plants. So we have all of these nutrients that feed all of those aquatic plants, and they grow huge amounts. What's the third thing that happens? They die because they run out of resource. So the algae dies. What then feeds on the algae? Bacteria, and the bacteria use all of the what in the water? And once all of the water and the oxygen is used, what happens? The fish die. All right. Make sure you know those steps. A dead zone forms because of eutrophication. Sometimes we're going to see dead zones downriver of a point source pollution. And we can go, here's the dead zone, so what's happening upstream that's going to cause this dead zone? We have had massive dead zones off of the Mississippi River, and you go, wow, what's causing that? All of the farm land from the Midwest drains into the Mississippi. And when all of that nutrient then combines, we end up with these dead zones. How do we then manage eutrophication? Because it is one of our huge pollution problems. first thing we're going to do is alter the human activity that's causing it. So if we know it's this influx of nutrients, maybe we can stop with the influx. When we talked about agricultural, those riparian zones, those wildland zones right next to the creek, the buffer zones, the idea there is to stop the nutrients from getting to the creek. So that the plants in that riparian or that buffer zone will absorb all the nutrients and it doesn't get into the waterway. We're going to regulate and reduce pollutants at the point. So we're going to find out who's polluting that river, who's releasing those nutrients, and we're going to stop them from doing it. Hopefully it's through education, but sometimes you got to do it through fines and taxation. And then we're going to clean up and restore. RSM Lake is in this clean up and restore phase. They've been in this phase for about 2 years. They're coming up with different ways to clean up that lake and restore. They're not there yet. The things that they are doing right now, the cheap ways, is if you've been up in that area or around that lake, they've got these floating islands with plants. The idea is that the roots of those plants go into the lake and they are sucking up nutrients. Those plants want the phosphorus, they want the nitrate. So they're sucking up the nutrients and taking it out of the water. Anytime you go to a body of water, usually man-made, and they've got like the fountains in the center, or they've got bubblers, they're oxygenating the lake. The idea there is to put oxygen back in. So they know that the bacteria is using all of this oxygen, so they're throwing oxygen back in. When you aerate water, when you throw it up in the air like that, or you disturb water, you increase the diffusion of oxygen into the water. And then they're doing a little kind of like back end cleanup. So we know that our swallows eat all of the gnats and the midge flies that come out of that lake when it's polluted. So when it gets warm, like you can't walk around that lake without swallowing mass amounts of bugs. So they have put nesting sites in a lot of the trees for the swallows so that at dusk you see the swallows just dive bombing all over the lake trying to eat the insects. So they're in this cleanup and restoration. Long-term cleanup and restoration of that lake is controversial, but what they're going to do is pump water out of the lake that is high in nutrients and use it for irrigation around the city and backfill the lake with fresh drinking water. So they're going to take the nutrient-heavy water out and put drinking water in, and it's going to be a continuous process. Controversial because we don't have a lot of drinking water in Southern California. Where they're going back on it is saying, look, we don't have the purple pipes yet in RSM, so we're irrigating with fresh water anyways. So all we're going to do is irrigate with lake water instead and use the fresh water we were using for irrigation to backfill the lake. It's, again, in this cleanup, restoration, mitigation phase. One of our main sources worldwide of eutrophication, main sources of water pollution worldwide, is human wastewater. So this is produced by humans as sewage from your toilets, as gray water from your washing machines, or in countries like India where they wash their clothes in the Ganges River, right? People defecate in the Ganges River. This is the main river through India. It is also one of the most polluted rivers through India. The main concern about this is the oxygen demanding waste. So anytime you put organic waste into a body of water, bacteria are going to want to break down that organic waste. That bacteria use a ton of oxygen, which then depletes the water of oxygen, and if you don't have oxygen, you don't have fish, yada, yada, yada. Creates an oxygen sag. You've seen this before. I took it from your water lecture, where you've got like healthy discharge of pollution, and you see everything die off because of eutrophication, and then it gets healthy again. If you know where this point in the river is, you can start looking upstream to find where that discharge pipe is. Another problem with human wastewater, other than the oxygen demand that it creates, is wastewater often carries pathogens. So if you get sick, your poop has all of those viruses or bacteria in it, And if you release that into the waterway without treatment and someone comes in contact, they can get sick from that as well. The World Health Organization estimates that 1.1 billion people don't have access to fresh water, that 42% of the world's population lacks access to proper sanitation, which means they don't have flushing toilets and running water in their household. 36% of people in sub-Saharan Africa don't have improved sanitation. All of this is a problem because it ends up with water that has pathogens in it, and then you drink that water, and we have babies dying of diarrhea-based diseases. Coliform bacteria is the bacteria that we look for when we talk about human waste. If we see an uptick in cholera bacteria, it means that someone's pooping in our river. Never a good thing. So how do we prevent it in our country? In our country, we have a very advanced sewer system. If you don't have connections to the public sewer systems, you're going to have a private waste management treatment. A lot of this is a septic tank. So if you are off the grid, you're going to have a septic tank, which is basically a big holding tank that's buried in the ground, and all of your poop and everything and your pee go into that holding tank. You put in that holding tank bacteria. The bacteria will start breaking it down, and then once every 5 to 10 years, you hire a company to come and pump out your septic tank for you. A lot of these septic tanks will have a leach field, so they'll have perforated underground pipes, and the liquid part of the waste will go into the underground, into the soil, and then become nutrients for the grass and everything to grow. This is what it would look like if this is your house, you're off grid, you don't have access to the public sewer, you're going to have septic tank. So you'd have 2 large tanks connected then to a leach field. So the solid stuff stays in this tank, the liquid stuff then goes out underground into the soil. Most of our homes, unless you live out in the canyon, are connected to the Orange County Department of Sanitation. And it's going to go through a bunch of treatments. When your stuff from your house first arrives at the treatment plant, there's going to be a big screen that's going to screen out any solids. By the way, this has been a test question before. Just letting you know. So primary treatment. Big screen's going to take out the big solid stuff, the toilet paper that didn't dissolve, the condoms that might be in the water, anything else you flushed down, like when you were a little kid and you flushed your army guys, they'd come out in primary. Then it goes into a holding tank, and the solid heavy stuff sinks to the bottom of that holding tank, and the liquids get to move on to the next tank. Every couple of months, they empty out that tank, and they come in and they scoop out all the solids, and they take that to a drying field. When I used to work for LA County Sanitation, our drying fields were out in Lancaster, Palmdale, right? Out in the desert where no one lives. They would take all of the solids from primary treatment out there by truck and spread it out in the desert and let it dry. Heat kills a lot of our bacteria and our viruses. Time kills a lot of bacteria and viruses. So they'd put it out there, let it dry, and then they sold it. You can use human solid waste as manure, as growing nutrients, as fertilizer for anything that is growing that is not going to be fed to humans. So you can't put this dried human waste on corn that's going to be sold at the farmer's market, but you can put it on corn that's going to be fed to a pig that's then fed to humans. You can't do direct feed, though, with human waste. So that's what's going on in primary. We're basically taking the solids out. Well, yeah, it's obviously cheaper to buy that than it is to buy, like, commercial fertilizer. A lot of the farms that are doing multiple things are going to use, like, cow manure, or if you're a pig farmer and you're also growing the feed for your pig, you're going to use the pig's poop to do it. But, yeah, this by far probably the cheapest manure you can buy if you're going to have to buy manure. Because no one wants it, right? LA County is just trying to get rid of all of this human poop. All right, secondary treatment. Now, all of the liquid stuff that was in that first tank, the solids have settled down. The liquid stuff moves into a second tank. In that second tank, we have bacteria and all of that kind of stuff that starts breaking down anything else that's left in the water. So secondary treatment is now biological. We're using good bacteria to outcompete bad bacteria. We're using good bacteria to break down anything that's left. We call these our aeration tanks. And so lots of bubbles going because we're giving all that oxygen to the bacteria that's going to break it down. After secondary, in some parts of the world, secondary is as good as it gets, and the water gets released at this point, gets released into our streams. This water is still high in nutrients. So it's cheap to release it at this point, but not necessarily good for the environment. In our area and in LA County, we go through tertiary treatment. Tertiary treatment is now chemical treatment. So after secondary, all the liquid stuff moves to another tank, and all of that is then treated with a flocking agent that takes anything that's solid, it like clumps it up and drops it down. It's treated usually with chlorine. The chlorine's going to kill anything that's living in that water. And then sometimes it's treated with UV light. That's like another way of killing anything that might be living. By the time the water comes out of tertiary treatment, it is safe to drink. I have seen guys at LA County Sanitation take a glass, dip it into tertiary, and drink it. It meets Clean Water, Clean Drinking Act. Would I personally do it? No. Am I somewhat grossed out by the guys that fish in the LA River where all 13 LA County sanitation plants dump into? A little bit. Mostly because I did the biological testing for LA County Sanitation, which was LC50s. LC50 is the lethal concentration of our sewage water on the fish. So you get a bunch of fish in a tank and you put tertiary water in and you see how long it takes to kill 50% of the fish. It happens. But it meets state law. That's all I gotta say. Animal waste, if you have a cow farm, it's going to go into what's called a manure lagoon. And you saw those in the last call at the Oasis where the little old lady was like going around sampling the water. These lagoons are lined with plastic to prevent the water from leaching out. Yeah, they're just kind of gross puddles of poo. We've seen this before. I stole it from one of your old lectures. Persistent organic pollutants are pesticides that remain active for long periods of time. DDT is a persistent organic pollutant. Arsenic is a new one. We haven't seen arsenic yet in a lecture. Arsenic is a naturally found element in Earth's crust, in rocks. Oh yeah, in the seeds of apples, there is arsenic. Not saying like to start collecting apple seeds to murder your neighbor, but you know there was an old Agatha Christie book, Arsenic and Old Lace, where they were killing all the bachelors using. Okay, anyways, arsenic is naturally occurring. It's a persistent organic pollutant. Hangs out. If there is arsenic in the drinking water, it can cause cancer. There is EPA standards for arsenic in the drinking water. It's 10 micrograms per liter. So anything below this maroon color, and you're safe. If it goes into the dark purple, now we've got problems. Inland California, right by the San Diego border, we have seen arsenic. So, could be a slight issue. As we start doing more solar panels and more conductors of electricity, we start to see the use of arsenic. If those companies aren't disposing of it correctly, we're going to start seeing it more in our drinking water. Other persistent organic pollutants are anything that we're using as a herbicide or a pesticide, those tend to be persistent organic pollutants that hang out in the environment for a long period of time and disrupt animal metabolism. We've talked about the 2 big oil spills, right? The Gulf of Mexico was Deepwater Horizon. The Exxon Valdez in Alaska. The problem is the oil gets on the feathers of the birds. Once the oil gets on, those feathers are no longer waterproof. It gets on the fur of animals. Once that oil gets on, that fur, it can no longer be used to retain heat. Problem when you're an animal in Alaska. When we see oil spills, we also see a reduction in tourism, because when Deepwater Horizon happened and oil's washing up on the beach, no one wants to go to the beach in Texas. We also see a reduction in fishing. So the video that I'm not going to show because we don't have time is linked right here, the Deepwater Horizon. And they talk about the economic impact 5 years later, how these fisheries didn't recover really fast. People went bankrupt because they weren't able to go out and go fishing because of Deepwater Horizon. We talked about thermal pollution, that's cyano-free. All right, coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is when all of the polyps that are in the coral die off, and what's left is kind of like the skeleton of the coral, and it's white. The 3 main causes: increase in ocean temperature. Polyps have a very specific range that they like to live in. You take them outside that range, they die. Sunscreen, the chemicals in the sunscreen. You can now buy coral-safe sunscreen. And then sediment. So as we get rid of the forests on the mainland or on the islands, all of the dirt washes out to the ocean, and that dirt clogs up the filters of the polyps, and the polyps die. And that's it. We got through it. Okay. Take a deep breath. That is really a lot.